A warm draft drifted through the living room windows on an early Saturday morning, rustling the curtains and sending a faint gust across the furnishings. Robert stood in front of a tall mirror near the hallway, running his fingertips nervously over the smooth fabric of a black dress he had slipped on moments before. A gentle thrill coursed through him. The house was silent, with his wife Susan fast asleep upstairs. Most days, he was a confident man who excelled at his job in the finance department of a mid-sized company. He had a polite disposition, kept his hair neatly trimmed, and dressed in business casual attire that matched his professional environment. Yet on certain special mornings, ones like today, he indulged in a pastime that felt electrifying and terrifying at the same time. His reflection in the mirror revealed a solidly built figure with broad shoulders. The delicate straps of the dress contrasted with his frame. He had short brown hair that he usually styled conservatively, and there was a light stubble on his chin because he had only done a quick partial shave before slipping into the outfit. In the fluorescent glow of a small lamp nearby, he could see each subtle line on his face, lines that came from years of both laughter and worry. He had passed his 40th birthday recently, and while he wasn't overly concerned with aging, he sometimes felt moments of restlessness, a quiet desire to explore parts of himself he rarely showed to the world. He listened carefully for any stirring from upstairs. Silence. He quietly opened the closet near the entryway and took out a pair of sleek black heels. He had hidden them in a shoebox labeled Misc Decorations, sure that Susan would not be rummaging around in a box that typically housed out-of-season ornaments. The heels gleamed under the faint living room light. Robert took a breath, slipped his feet into them, and stood up tall. He had practiced balancing in them before, but it still took a moment of concentration to stay steady. Another wave of anticipation fluttered in his chest. He made his way cautiously around the living room, the heels clicking against the hardwood floor. He passed the large leather sofa where he and Susan often watched late-night television. Moving around the coffee table, he found himself confronted by an emotional swirl. Was this reckless? Was it worth the risk? Something deep inside compelled him to continue, like a secret expedition he knew could be uncovered at any second. That tension made it all the more alluring. Footsteps creaked on the upstairs landing. Robert froze, heart hammering. When the house fell quiet again, he let out a careful exhale. He took a glance at the clock on the wall. Soon, it would be time for Susan to wake up. If he was going to indulge in this moment, it had to be brief. He walked toward a mirror hung near the front door. The reflection was a curious merging. A fairly tall man, lean but with a steady presence, wearing an elegant black dress and matching heels. The clothes accentuated his height. He frowned at the hint of stubble that marred the effect, then tilted his head to look at himself from a different angle. With that last glimpse, he decided it was time to change back. He removed the heels first, returning them to their box, and then stripped away the dress. Once out of these items, he stashed them in a small duffel bag he kept beneath a pile of winter coats in the closet. A wave of nerves passed through him as he hurried to the main bedroom to shower and get dressed for the day. Jeans, a plain button-down shirt, socks, and sneakers. By the time Susan awoke and wandered in, he was making coffee as if he had been up for a regular early start. "Morning," she greeted him, padding into the kitchen in her fluffy slippers. Her long blonde hair was in a loose braid over one shoulder, and she looked slightly disoriented the way she often did before her first cup of coffee. She was just a few years younger than Robert, with warm brown eyes that, once alert, could scrutinize a person's face and sense every flicker of emotion. "Morning," he responded, hoping his voice sounded calm. The adrenaline from his secret morning routine still hummed in his veins, but he forced a casual smile, handing her a steaming mug. Susan took the coffee gratefully and sipped. "You're up bright and early," she noted. But it was a simple statement, not a suspicion. He chuckled, managing to keep his voice light. "Couldn't sleep, so I thought I'd get a head start." She accepted his words with a nod, leaning her hip against the counter. If there was any tension in Robert's demeanor, she didn't mention it. Still, he felt a tiny pang of guilt as he offered her a plate of scrambled eggs. Their home was a modest suburban place with 3 bedrooms, one they used as an office, and a backyard that Robert mowed religiously every other weekend. They had settled in just after they were married. Susan worked as an elementary school teacher, giving her a lively temperament and a caring nature, but also a strong capacity for honesty. Robert loved that about her. She was direct. She would never sugarcoat the truth. Yet that exact trait also fed his worries because if she discovered his pastime, she would never disguise her immediate reaction. At this moment, though, they had a comfortable air between them. They ate their breakfast at the small kitchen table, discussing upcoming errands. Susan dropped a hint about wanting to plant new flowers in the backyard soon. Robert, who felt a swell of relief that he hadn't been caught, agreed enthusiastically to help. Their conversation felt ordinary, completely normal. For Robert, that normalcy masked a quiet, persistent tension. That day passed without anything remarkable. Robert and Susan visited the home improvement store for seeds and gardening supplies, grabbed a bite at a local cafe, and returned home. Later that afternoon, Robert helped set up some planters in the backyard. When Susan went inside to answer a phone call, he took a moment to marvel at how routine everything felt. He wanted it to remain this way, an everyday life shared with the woman he loved. Still, the things that set his heart racing, his private moments wearing women's clothing, lived in a compartment of his mind that he feared might upend everything if opened. It was a few days later, on a clear Thursday evening, when Robert found an unexpected surge of restlessness. Susan had left for a late dinner with a couple of colleagues. She would likely be gone for a couple of hours. At first, Robert planned on catching up on some reading or flipping through channels, but as he climbed the stairs, the quiet emptiness of the house reminded him that he was alone. And soon, the desire to explore his private side returned. He carefully closed the blinds in the bedroom. From beneath the row of hanging jackets in the closet, he retrieved the duffel bag where he kept his dress, the pair of heels, and a few pieces of costume jewelry, an assortment of clip-on earrings, plus a sparkly necklace with faux gems that he'd picked up quietly at a thrift store. The moment he set them on the bed, he felt a quiver of both guilt and excitement. Was this the night he would push his boundary just a bit further? He slipped on the dress, noticing the smooth sensation as it hugged his frame. He had always been broad-chested, a feature that made button-down shirts fit him nicely for the office. Now, wearing something designed for a more slender form, he saw the interplay between what felt masculine in his body and the feminine lines of the garment. Next, he tried the clip-on earrings, those little sparkly studs that added a hint of glamour. He looked in the bedroom mirror, turned his head from side to side. A subdued smile formed on his lips. He liked how it looked. The final step was the heels. He put them on with practiced caution, making sure he had his balance. Then he walked a few test steps across the bedroom carpet. The sense of risk was more pronounced than ever. Usually, he confined these activities to short increments. Tonight, perhaps fueled by an unexplainable boldness, he ventured out of the bedroom and carefully descended the stairs. The clack of the heels on each step set his heart racing. He peered through the front blinds. It was dark outside, and not many lights shone from the neighboring homes. With some measured confidence, he decided to walk around the living room again, allowing himself a taste of freedom. In that hushed space, the only sounds were the faint hum of the refrigerator and the echo of his heels on the floor. Every so often, a car would pass on the street, its headlights illuminating the curtains. Robert would pause nervously, breathing carefully, wary of any silhouette that might appear at the front window. No one came. He relished a few more minutes of that thrilling secrecy. Eventually, he checked the time. Susan would return soon. Determined not to repeat the mistakes of the past, like nearly getting caught on a Saturday morning, he hurried back upstairs. He removed the dress, the heels, and the clip-on earrings, folding everything neatly back into the duffel. He took a couple of minutes to wipe away any trace of makeup from his face. He'd only applied a quick foundation that smoothed out some lines but didn't look too obvious. Then he put on a plain t-shirt and sweatpants. By the time Susan came through the front door, he was lying casually on the sofa, channel surfing. "Hey, honey," she greeted, setting her purse down, her voice bright. "I'm back. Dinner ran a bit late, but it was good. We finalized some school event plans." He sat up and smiled. "All good here, just relaxing." She walked over, leaned in, and kissed him on the cheek. "Everything okay?" she asked, noticing his slightly elevated energy. He must have still been a bit keyed up from his covert activities, though he tried to mask it. "Yeah," he replied, forcing a casual tone. "Been watching random reruns, waiting for you." She accepted the answer easily enough. Soon they were chatting about her colleagues, the meal, and the details of her upcoming events at work. He listened attentively, always mindful of how close he had come to being discovered. Thankfully, it seemed he remained in the clear, at least for now. But secrets have ways of emerging in even the most innocuous circumstances. Robert realized that all too well the following weekend. They had planned a small out-of-town drive to visit Susan's parents on Sunday. Saturday morning, Susan suggested they give the car a thorough cleaning, inside and out, so it would be comfortable for the trip. Robert agreed without hesitation. They had a nice routine of washing and vacuuming the car together, something that felt like a basic couple's chore. So that afternoon, in pleasant weather, they pulled the car into the driveway. Susan turned on a playlist from her phone, humming along as she gathered cleaning supplies. Robert set the vacuum to a lower suction setting. He started with the trunk while Susan tackled the back seat, collecting old receipts, stray water bottles, and any bits of trash. Eventually, Robert joined her, leaning in through the rear door to vacuum under the seats. He felt easy camaraderie with her, even joking about the random items they occasionally found. A missing pen, a grocery list from who knows when, a half-broken phone charger. Then Susan took over, saying, "I'll do the passenger side." She moved around to the front seat, brush in hand. Robert heard the rustling of the vacuum and the shuffle of items, but he wasn't paying much attention. He was wiping down the dashboard from the driver's side. A few minutes passed in pleasant silence until he heard Susan's voice, sharp and perplexed. "Hey, what's this?" He glanced up, noticing immediately that she was not referring to trash. Her eyes were fixed on an object she held in her hand. Suddenly, Robert recognized it. A slender black heel, the mate to the pair he often wore. A wave of cold anxiety rippled down his spine. How could he have been so careless? He fought to compose himself, swallowing hard. "What do you mean?" he managed, feigning ignorance. Susan held up the heel, her brow furrowing. This was under the passenger seat, and that's not all. In her other hand, she produced a tiny, sparkly earring, the kind that might have fallen off easily. The sight of it struck him like a punch in the stomach. That was one of his clip-ons, or at least the small portion that sometimes got dislodged. Robert tried to keep his expression neutral, but the horror of the situation was quickly dawning on him. The rational part of his mind churned with thoughts. He might have left the heel in the car after some late-night experiment, maybe after returning from a business trip where he'd had an opportunity to indulge in cross-dressing somewhere outside the house. The earring could have dropped while rummaging in the back seat. He simply hadn't noticed. He had grown complacent, and now he was cornered. Susan stared at him, words swirling in her mind that she hadn't yet formed into questions. The look in her eyes spoke volumes, confusion, suspicion, hurt. "Robert," she said quietly, "whose shoe is this? And whose earring is this? They're definitely not mine. I've never seen them before." He saw the tension in her posture, recognized a mix of apprehension and the beginnings of anger. She clearly suspected an affair. He could see it in the way her jaw tightened. Her voice was steady, but behind it was an undertone of betrayal. "Please tell me," she added, "what's going on?" Time stood still for a moment. Robert felt the dryness in his throat, the unsteady churn of panic in his stomach. This was it. He could either keep her suspecting infidelity or reveal the truth, which in some ways felt even more complicated. He hesitated, bracing himself, measuring the shock that would register on her face. "Susan," he began, his heart pounding, I can explain." The words fumbled out, lacking direction. His gaze flickered from the shoe to her face and back again. I'm not having an affair." She narrowed her eyes, uncertain. "Then whose things are these? They didn't just appear out of nowhere." He fumbled for an answer but found himself paralyzed. No easy excuse sprang to mind. He couldn't claim they belonged to a friend. Susan would see through that immediately. Why would a friend's single heel be under the passenger seat, along with a dropped earring? It made no logical sense. When he didn't speak, Susan stepped forward, her tone rising with an edge of urgency. "Robert, you have to tell me the truth," she insisted, voice wavering between anger and fear. "I can handle whatever this is, but I won't stand for lies." He pressed a hand to his forehead and took a deep breath, feeling cornered. "It's complicated," he muttered, summoning every ounce of courage. They're mine." She stared at him, expression shifting from suspicion to bewilderment. "That's impossible," she said firmly. "How can they be yours?" The admission lodged in his throat. He looked away, then took a breath. "I wear them sometimes," he said more softly, each word tasting foreign. "I dress up here and there. I know it might sound strange." A stunned silence hung in the air. The vacuum's low hum, which still ran in the background, felt disconnected from reality, as though it came from another world. Susan's mouth parted slightly as she tried to process what he was saying. Robert saw her grip on the heel tighten. Her knuckles went pale. "You," she began slowly, trying to find the right words, "wear these?" He nodded, shame heating his cheeks, as though a spotlight had pinned him in place. "I've been doing it for a while," he continued quietly. "Not all the time, just sometimes. I try to keep it to myself because I didn't know how you'd react. I never wanted to upset you." The vacuum motor wound down as Susan flipped the switch off. She set both objects on the car seat, folding her arms over her chest. The next moment felt like an eternity as she stared at him, trying to reconcile the man she knew with this new information. "Why wouldn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice breaking the stillness. It held a mixture of confusion, disappointment, and an undercurrent of hurt. "Don't you trust me?" "I do," he said quickly, stepping forward in a plea. "It's just, I was afraid of how it might change things between us. I never wanted to risk that." Susan exhaled sharply, pressing her lips together. She looked at the shoe again, then at Robert. "So, there isn't another woman?" "No, absolutely not. I swear." He paused, swallowing hard. "I love you. There's no one else." Her brows were still furrowed, as though that explanation, while relieving one suspicion, opened the door to a whole new whirl of questions. "You really dress up? Do you like it?" She stumbled over the question. He nodded, bracing himself on the side of the car. "Yes," he replied quietly. "I guess it's something I do that feels right sometimes. I don't know how else to explain it." They lingered in that tense moment as Susan grappled with the revelation. Her breathing was shallow. She glanced around, perhaps worried neighbors might overhear, so she motioned him to come inside. The two of them left the car partly cleaned, went into the house, and closed the door behind them. In the living room, Susan sat on the couch. She looked at her husband with searching eyes, as though reevaluating every assumption she had about him. Robert sat down carefully on a chair across from her. They faced each other in a hushed atmosphere, the air thick with unresolved tension. Susan took a slow breath. "So, how long has this been going on?" Her voice carried more calm than he expected, but he could see her eyes glistening with confusion. "Years," he admitted, voice subdued. "Before we even got married. It was something I tried to bury. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to talk about it. It always felt like a secret I had to keep." She bowed her head, pressing her fingertips to her temple. "You never thought to mention this before we got married?" He swallowed. "I wanted to, but I was terrified. I thought I could handle it alone. I didn't want to burden you or drive you away, so I tried to keep it under control, behind closed doors." She let out a trembling sigh, trying to bridge the gap in her understanding. "But why? Why hide something like this? I'm your wife. We share everything." Her voice softened. "Or at least, I thought we did." He leaned forward, wishing he could hold her hands, but sensing she might need space. "I never wanted to hurt you. I worried you'd think I was—" He paused, struggling for the right word. "Broken somehow, or that it would disgust you, or make you see me differently." Susan wrapped her arms around herself, staring off into the distance for a moment. "I'm not sure what I'm feeling. Part of me is relieved it's not another woman. Part of me is sad you thought you had to hide." Robert felt tears threaten to rise, though he kept them at bay. "I don't want to lose you," he said, voice tight. "This is about clothing, but it's also something personal. I've always struggled with it, uncertain if I should tell anyone. Please know that it's never been about betraying you. I'm still me." She looked at him intently, tears brimming in her eyes. For a while, neither of them spoke. A vacuum of emotion passed between them, layered with vulnerability. Finally, Susan nodded, more to herself than to him. "I hear you," she whispered, "but I need time." He nodded, the tension in his shoulders unwavering. "Of course." They sat like that for long minutes, the tension eased only by quiet breathing. Susan stood first, crossing the room to look out the window. She watched the sunlight glancing off the half-cleaned car in the driveway. "There's still so much I don't understand," she said softly. "But maybe we don't have to figure everything out right this second." Robert rose from the chair, approached her tentatively. "We can talk about it whenever you want," he offered. "I'll answer any questions. I'm done hiding." She glanced over her shoulder, meeting his eyes. "I appreciate that." They decided to finish cleaning the car, though the atmosphere between them was strained with newly exposed secrets. Robert held the shoe and earring in his hand before stowing them in a paper bag so they wouldn't be out in the open. Susan's face was drawn into a pensive frown, lost in her own swirl of thoughts. That evening, they went through the motions of dinner, each of them subdued. Normally, they might sit down to a relaxing glass of wine. Instead, they picked at their food with little appetite. Eventually, Susan retreated to the bedroom early, and Robert stayed downstairs, flipping aimlessly through TV channels. The hum of the screen provided background noise, but his mind was elsewhere. He kept picturing the moment she discovered the heel, the raw look of disbelief and hurt in her eyes when he finally confessed. He knew the next steps in their relationship hinged on honest dialogue, yet the unknown lingered, and worry churned within him like a heavy knot. The next morning found them both in quiet moods. Robert woke up early again, his heart heavier than usual. Susan stirred soon after, stepping into the kitchen while wearing a simple pair of sweatpants and an old college t-shirt. Her hair was tied back into a ponytail, but she looked weary in a way he hadn't seen before. "Morning," he offered tentatively, his voice gentle. She nodded a greeting, rubbing her eyes. He slid a mug of coffee toward her across the counter. For a moment their gazes locked, and an unspoken understanding passed between them. This was going to be a difficult day, but a necessary one. They carried their coffees into the living room and sat down side by side on the couch. The closeness felt slightly tense, but neither of them moved away. Susan traced the rim of her mug with her finger, mustering the courage to speak. "So," she began, her voice oddly steady, "can you tell me more about this side of you? I don't even know where to start." Robert placed his mug on the coffee table, clasping his hands. "I'm not sure how to sum it all up," he confessed. "It's something I've been drawn to since I was young. It started as curiosity. I'd see clothes in magazines or in stores, and part of me was fascinated by how they might feel. And over time I realized it was more than a passing thought. It was important in a way I couldn't explain. As I got older, I found ways to try on items in secret. I felt guilty, even though it didn't feel harmful to me personally. But it's not exactly something accepted by most people I know, especially in my work environment." Susan studied his face. "You never told anyone?" He shook his head. "Never. You're the first person I've ever confided in." That realization was overwhelming in its own right. He sat there, shoulders tensed, unsure if she would be distressed by that fact or find it a reason to empathize. Susan inhaled slowly, her gaze shifting to the window. "I guess I'm trying to understand if this changes anything fundamental about who you are. Are you still the husband I know?" A wave of emotion tugged at his chest. "I am," he answered gently. "I promise I haven't changed. I just haven't told you everything, and that's on me. I'm sorry." She nodded thoughtfully. "I believe you, and I think a lot of what I'm feeling is disappointed you felt like you couldn't tell me. I thought we shared our vulnerable sides with each other." He reached for her hand. "We do, or at least, I want to," he said earnestly, voice trembling. "I was just so scared. In my head, there were 1,000 scenarios where this would ruin us. I couldn't bear the idea of you leaving." Susan closed her eyes, wrestling with the waves of emotion. "I can't promise I understand all of this right now," she said after a pause. "It's a lot, but I can promise I won't just walk away without trying to figure it out." A fragile hope flickered in Robert's eyes. He squeezed her hand gently, grateful for that small measure of reassurance. "Thank you." They spent the next hour or so exchanging halting conversation. Susan asked if there was anything else he had hidden from her. He shook his head firmly. This was the only major secret he had. She asked if it impacted how he felt about their relationship romantically. He said no, that he was committed to her, and she believed him. The vulnerability in his voice was undeniable. At length, though, they needed a break. Susan decided to go for a short walk around the neighborhood. Robert stayed behind, needing space to clear his thoughts. He found himself in the bedroom, glancing at the spot in the closet where he usually hid his duffel bag. Everything felt changed now. His quiet pastime was no longer a private ritual. Susan knew. He wasn't sure if that meant a future of greater honesty or a fracturing of trust. Days slipped by. A mild tension hovered in the house, sometimes surfacing in the form of careful words or elongated silences. Susan had a busy stretch at work, planning a school event that consumed her days and left her exhausted in the evenings. Robert did his best to handle chores, make dinner, and give her space. They didn't dive back into the big conversation right away, as if both sensed the need for a short retreat to process. One evening, though, they found themselves side by side on the couch, a movie playing quietly in the background. Susan reached for the remote and paused the film, then turned to Robert. "I think we should talk," she said softly. Her tone was gentle but purposeful. "It's been lingering in my head all week." He muted the TV, shifting to face her. "I agree." She drew in a breath, choosing her words carefully. "I don't want to ignore it, but I'm also not sure how to move forward. Is it something you plan to keep doing, dressing in that way?" He swallowed. He had been anticipating this question. "I think so," he admitted, voice low. "I don't think it's something that just goes away. But I promise, I never meant to disrespect you or keep secrets. I just didn't want to cause distress." Susan studied his face, searching for sincerity. "Have you ever thought about letting me see you like that?" He blinked in surprise, not expecting the question. I didn't think you'd want to." She hesitated, fiddling with the hem of a pillow cover. "I don't know how I feel about it yet, but part of me wonders if it'd be less scary if I could see for myself. Maybe we can figure out what we're dealing with, instead of letting my imagination go wild." His heart quickened, half in fear, half in a surge of relief. "Only if you're comfortable. I'd never pressure you." Susan gave a slight nod, a seriousness to her features. "I can't promise how I'll react, but I'd rather face it directly than avoid it." They sat with that decision for a moment, letting its significance sink in. Finally, Robert cleared his throat. "We don't have to do it tonight. I want you to be sure." She glanced at the TV. "Tomorrow," she said quietly, turning back to him. "I'm free after work. Let's order in, and maybe we'll try, and we'll see how it goes." He nodded. "Okay, tomorrow then." The following day felt like a slow march toward a momentous occasion. Robert worked through tasks at the office, but his mind kept drifting to the evening plan. He had never shown this side of himself to anyone, let alone his wife, and he had no idea how she would respond once she actually saw him wearing what he had hidden for so long. Meanwhile, Susan taught her students, her mind occasionally floating to questions about the night ahead. It felt surreal, as if she was about to embark on a conversation that she never imagined would be part of her marriage. That evening, they sat at the kitchen table, picking at the takeout they'd ordered. Tension underlaid each bite. Finally, Susan wiped her mouth with a napkin. "So, should we go upstairs?" she asked, her voice taut with cautious determination. Robert nodded, standing up, his stomach clenching with nerves. The two of them ascended the stairs. The hall light felt brighter than usual, throwing shadows on the walls in stark relief. When they entered the bedroom, Robert flicked on the smaller lamp on the nightstand, which cast a gentler glow. Susan hovered near the bed, arms crossed defensively, though her expression was determined. Robert crouched by the closet, hands trembling slightly as he retrieved the duffel bag. The quiet tension was palpable. They both knew this would be a revealing moment. He hesitated, then looked over at her. "I might need a minute to change, unless you want to watch." She shook her head quickly, eyes wide with apprehension. "I'll give you some space. I'll wait in the hallway." He nodded, grateful for the small reprieve. "Thank you." As Susan stepped out, gently closing the door behind her, Robert inhaled deeply to settle his nerves. Slowly, he slipped out of his everyday clothes and carefully selected the black dress he had grown fond of, simple, knee-length, with thin straps. He stepped into it, zipped himself up, and then dug out the pair of heels. His hands felt clammy as he slid them on. Lastly, he fumbled with a set of clip-on earrings, similar to the ones that had fallen off in the car. He checked himself in the mirror, seeing that same intersection of masculine build with feminine attire. His breath quivered. This was the first time he would emerge from behind locked doors dressed this way, in front of the person who mattered to him most. He walked to the bedroom door, the heels making soft taps on the carpet. With a cautious turn of the knob, he opened it. Susan was standing across the hall, leaning against the wall. At the sight of him, her eyes went wide. She inhaled, placing a hand over her mouth. Robert's heart pounded. He braced for rejection, for laughter, for anger. He didn't know how to interpret her reaction. She just stood there, taking in the sight, speechless. Finally, she lowered her hand, though she didn't move closer yet. He broke the tense silence. "I'm sorry," he began, unsure of what else to say. "It's still me." Susan swallowed, collecting herself. She looked him up and down, her eyes lingering on the cut of the dress over his broad shoulders, the heels that elevated his height, the glinting earrings. "It's different," she murmured, "seeing you like this." He nodded, trembling inside. "Yeah." She took a cautious step forward. "I never thought I would see my husband in a dress. It's a lot to take in." He lowered his gaze, feeling a wave of vulnerability. "If this is too much, say the word. I'll change." She pressed her lips together, eyes still surveying him. "No," she said softly. "Just give me a minute." They both stood in the hallway, the overhead light revealing every detail. Robert's breathing was shallow, and he was about to suggest they go back into the bedroom for privacy. But then Susan took another step, studying his face, which was tinged with embarrassment. She reached out tentatively, brushing a fingertip along the thin strap of his dress. The gesture felt oddly intimate, and Robert's breath caught in his throat. He saw a swirl of emotion in her expression, curiosity, lingering confusion, even a flicker of compassion. "How do you feel right now?" she asked softly. "Exposed," he admitted, letting out a shaky half laugh. "It's nerve-wracking." She nodded slowly, drawing her hand back. "I can imagine." There was a long pause before she spoke again. "I never pictured this side of you. And yet, here it is." She hesitated. "I won't pretend this isn't shocking, but I also see that it matters to you." He clung to those last words, taking them as a cautious sign that she wasn't repelled. "Thank you for not closing the door on me," he murmured. Susan's eyes shone with complexity. "I love you," she said, voice quivering. "That hasn't changed, but this is new territory for me, for us." He stepped aside, nodding for her to come into the bedroom where they could talk more comfortably. She followed, sitting on the edge of the bed. Robert lowered himself into the armchair by the corner. The click of his heels against the floor felt surreal. They faced each other in that warm lamplight, the bed an unspoken boundary between them. Susan gave a wavering smile. "It's almost like meeting a part of you I never knew. You look—" She trailed off, lost for the right word. He cleared his throat. "Probably strange," he finished for her, bracing himself for harsh judgment. She shook her head slightly. "Not exactly strange. Surprising, sure. But I see you're making an effort." Her gaze dropped to the sparkly earrings. "Those are the same type you lost in the car, aren't they?" He blushed. "Yes." A moment passed. Then she patted the space on the bed next to her. "Come here." Robert stood, carefully maneuvering around the bed in the heels, and sat next to her. They were close enough that she could rest a hand on his arm. She did so, and he felt warmth from her touch. Her next words were quiet but steady. Is this something you've been wanting to share with me for a while? Or were you planning on keeping it hidden forever? He exhaled slowly, weighed down by regret. Deep down, I wanted to share it, he said, glancing at his hands. But fear always won out. I convinced myself it was better to keep it hidden. After all, I didn't want to risk our relationship. Susan listened, her expression a mixture of empathy and lingering hesitation. Relationships are built on honesty, though. You know that, she pointed out gently. He nodded, head hanging a bit. I do. I should have trusted you more. I hope you can forgive me. She paused before responding. I'm not sure how this will unfold, but I want to try to understand. I don't want to shame you for something that doesn't actually harm me. It's just a shock, that's all. He felt the sting of tears at the corners of his eyes. I really appreciate it. I'm so sorry you had to find out in such a jarring way. She reached for his hand, holding it gently. Let's figure this out, step by step. Robert squeezed her hand. The two of them sat there, a tense but tender moment that hinted at some possibility of working through this. After a while, Susan let go of his hand and said, You can change if you want. I think we've both seen enough for one evening. Relief flowed through him. He carefully stood up, moved to the closet, and exchanged the dress and heels for his usual sweatpants. He placed the items gently back into the duffel bag, aware that they were no longer a total secret. In a way, that was liberating, though he also sensed many unanswered questions lay ahead. In the days that followed, the subject of Robert's cross-dressing became an ongoing conversation between them, sometimes halting, sometimes surprisingly open. Susan began asking more pointed questions. Did he like to wear makeup? Did he have more clothes than just that dress? Where did he get the heels? Did he ever feel a need to do this outside the house? Her questions were cautious but frank, tinged with curiosity and caution. Robert answered as best he could, admitting he had only lightly experimented with makeup. He assured her that most of what he had was just that single dress, the heels, some costume jewelry, and maybe a skirt or two. The items were stored in the duffel bag he moved from place to place, in and out of closets. For Susan, it was a strange balancing act. Part of her was still shaken by the surprise. She occasionally found herself looking at Robert in the middle of everyday tasks, like when he was making coffee or paying bills, and imagining him in the dress. Yet another part of her recognized that in their day-to-day lives, he was the same person she'd always known. Thoughtful, caring, steady. She realized the presence of his secret habit didn't erase his reliability, or how he cooked dinner for her on stressful days, or how he always tried to make her laugh after a hard week. Still, an undercurrent of uncertainty remained. One evening, after they had both returned from work, they settled in for a quiet night. Susan, folding laundry on the sofa, ventured into the heart of what was weighing on her. Are you unhappy with our life? She asked abruptly, a pair of socks in her hand. Robert looked up from reading some documents. No, he said, startled. Why would you think that? She pressed her lips together. I wonder if there's something deeper going on, like maybe you aren't satisfied with who you are or how our life is, so you look for something else, like wearing different clothes. He set the papers aside and moved to sit next to her on the sofa. No, he repeated more softly, shaking his head. Our life is good, I promise. This thing I do, it's more about a feeling I can't quite explain, rather than dissatisfaction with our marriage or my work. He hesitated, trying to articulate it. It's just something that's a part of me. I wish I had told you sooner. Susan placed the folded socks in a basket, gaze softening. I don't want you to feel ashamed, she said, though uncertainty lingered in her eyes. I just hope you aren't carrying some unhappiness that I could help with. He gave a small, appreciative smile. "Thank you for caring. I'm not unhappy with us. That's the truth." She nodded, though the flicker of concern in her eyes didn't vanish entirely. "Okay." As the weeks passed, they stumbled through the new reality of partial openness. Some evenings, Susan would ask Robert if he needed any time or space, a veiled reference to whether he wanted to cross-dress. He would either shrug and say he was fine, or sometimes note that he might like a bit of private time. The first time he mentioned the idea, she took a deep breath and hesitantly said, "You don't have to hide in the basement or anything, just maybe not while I'm in the same room yet." He nodded understandingly, recognizing that she was trying. He continued to be mindful not to spring it on her without warning. If ever he felt the pull to dress up, he'd wait until she was out of the house or quietly mention it, giving her the option to decide how involved she wanted to be. Sometimes she just said, "Okay, I'll be in the living room," and put on headphones to watch a show. Other times, she'd leave him to it entirely and run errands. It was an evolving process, but at least they were talking, which made all the difference in the atmosphere between them. One night, perhaps a month after the day Susan discovered the heel and earring in the car, she returned home from a school function earlier than expected. Robert was upstairs, wearing a casual blouse he'd recently purchased online, a soft material in a muted color that felt comfortably modest, not flashy. He had on a skirt that fell just above the knee, and for once, no heels. Instead, he wore socks, trying to keep the noise level down. He heard the front door open and froze, heart lurching. He had assumed she'd be much later, so he'd planned to change before she got home. But there wasn't time now. He heard the clatter of her keys. Footsteps approached the stairs. A swirl of panic rose in his chest. Should he race to strip everything off or just wait it out? Her voice came from the hallway. "Robert, I'm back. The event ended sooner than I—" She paused as she stepped into the bedroom doorway. There he was, perched on the edge of the bed, startled, wearing the blouse and skirt. A silence thick with surprise and tension enveloped them. Finally, Susan spoke, catching her breath. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize you'd be doing this now." He stood quickly, smoothing the skirt reflexively. "I'm sorry," he said, voice trembling. "I thought you'd be out later. I was going to change before you got home." She set her purse down on the dresser. "It's okay," she said, though her eyes took a moment to adjust to the scene. "You don't have to apologize. I just wasn't expecting it." He gave a small, uncertain nod. The tension in his posture was visible. He was ready to flee to the closet to remove the outfit. But she held up a hand, a gentle motion telling him not to run away. "Stay," she said quietly. Then she let out a breath and tried to offer a half smile. "We've talked about this, right? I can handle it, even if I'm still getting used to it." The relief that flooded him was almost dizzying. He cleared his throat. "Thank you. I'm sorry if it startled you." She exhaled, releasing some of her own tension. "Surprised, yes, not hurt. Let's just maybe sit for a bit." They settled on the edge of the bed, both uncertain what to say next. The hush was broken only by the sound of the air conditioning kicking on. Susan studied his outfit. It was modest, no flashy colors or intricate patterns. He had on a simple blouse that might have come from a department store, and the skirt was of a decent length. The look was certainly different from the man she had grown up with, but it wasn't nearly as jarring as she feared it might be. She tentatively reached out, grazing the fabric of the blouse. "It's soft," she remarked. "Yeah," he agreed quietly, following her gaze. "I liked how it felt." She nodded, her hand moving away. "Robert, do you ever wish I'd join you? Like, would you want me to help with your outfits or something?" He considered the question carefully, swallowing. "Only if you wanted to. I'd never pressure you. Part of me thinks it might feel less lonely to share it, but I get it might be awkward." Susan pressed her lips together, pondering. "Maybe one day," she said, voice trembling slightly. "I'm not quite there yet, but I don't want you to feel like you're alone or that I'm shutting you out." He lowered his gaze, touched by her honesty. "That means a lot." Susan nodded, her gaze drifting around the room. "It's been a long day. I think I need a shower. Will you stay like this for a little while?" He blinked at her, uncertain if she was serious. "Are you sure?" She gave a tentative half smile. "Yes, I'll just need some moments to myself, but maybe later we can watch a show or something. Let's try to be normal, even if it's a different kind of normal." His chest felt tight with gratitude. "All right," he whispered. "I'll wait here." She disappeared into the bathroom, leaving him on the bed with a swirl of emotions he could hardly define. He felt profound relief, lingering fear, and a new kind of closeness to her, though the road still felt long and complicated. In the following weeks, that different kind of normal became their cautious pattern. Sometimes Susan would come home, find Robert in his usual t-shirt and jeans, and life continued without mention of cross-dressing. Other times, she might bump into him in the hallway when he was wearing a piece of clothing less obviously masculine. She still stiffened at times, or would quickly duck into a different room, but she pushed herself to at least accept his presence in that form. They learned to talk through the tension bit by bit, building a fragile bond of honesty. One Saturday morning, over coffee, Susan ventured something she'd been thinking about. "You said you only have a couple outfits, right? The black dress, a skirt or two, and those heels?" Robert nodded carefully, sipping from his mug. "Right, that's all." She pursed her lips. "Have you thought about maybe getting something that fits you better? I noticed the dress is tight in some areas. It's probably not all that comfortable." He swallowed, startled by her comment. "I hadn't really thought about it. I just bought what I thought looked nice. But yeah, it can be uncomfortable." Susan studied her coffee for a moment. "I'm not promising anything, but maybe we could look online together. If this is something you do, you might as well have something that actually fits." He watched her, surprised. "If you're okay with that." She shrugged, her cheeks flushing slightly. "I'm still adjusting, but maybe it'll help me accept it if it doesn't feel so sneaky." He hesitated, then offered a small, earnest nod. "I'd really appreciate that." So later that day, in a rare moment of shared closeness on this topic, they sat together in front of a laptop, browsing a few online clothing stores. Susan approached it with a teacher's practicality, focusing on items that might fit his broader shoulders or longer arms. Robert was both excited and shy, especially when she pointed out a blouse that might complement his complexion. There was an underlying awkwardness. Both were aware this was a huge step, but it was also a moment of fragile unity. When they placed an order for a simple blouse and a slightly roomier skirt, Robert felt a mixture of excitement and a dull ache of guilt. He worried it was too much for Susan, yet she carried on, committed to understanding him. By the end of the session, they were both drained, but strangely relieved. There had been no explosive argument, no sense that they were on the brink of collapse. Instead, they'd taken a cautious leap together. As more time passed, the tension in the house cooled to a manageable level. Susan still had moments where she grappled with complicated emotions. Her husband's pastime was not the sort of revelation she had expected so many years into their marriage. Yet she also recognized that he was the same person who knew her favorite songs, rubbed her shoulders when she was tense, and loved making her laugh over silly inside jokes. The cross-dressing didn't replace any of that. One evening, after both had returned from work, they sat together at the dining table finishing dinner. The conversation steered toward an upcoming visit from Susan's sister Beth. Usually, Beth stayed in the guest room for the weekend, which was also the same space where Robert sometimes stored his duffel bag if he needed quick access. "Beth will be here on Friday," Susan mentioned, sipping her water. "She'll probably crash in the guest room again, so maybe we should make sure it's tidy." Robert nodded, tensing a bit. "Right. I'll move my stuff," he said, referring implicitly to his clothes. "I don't want any mishaps." Susan frowned sympathetically. "Yeah, probably for the best. I'm not ready for her to find a random heel or something like that and start asking questions." A delicate sadness passed between them. This secret they'd unearthed was not something they were ready to share beyond their walls. Even with the progress they had made, they knew how complicated it could get with close family. They dropped the topic for the moment. Later that night, as they settled onto the sofa to watch a light-hearted movie, Susan unexpectedly scooted closer, resting her head on Robert's shoulder. He wrapped an arm around her. The hush of the house, the warmth of shared affection, and the flickering TV screen reminded both of them that, despite everything, they were together. An unsaid promise hung in the air. They would work it out, even if it took time. At one point in the movie, there was a comedic scene involving a disguised character. Robert froze slightly, wondering if it would trigger an awkward reaction. Susan tensed for a second, then relaxed, giving his hand a gentle squeeze. It was a small gesture, but it carried meaning. She saw him, she knew his secret, and she was willing to stay by his side. When the credits rolled, Susan turned the TV off, looked at him, and gave a tired but genuine smile. "Thank you," she said softly. He returned a quizzical look. "For what?" She leaned against him. "For being honest with me, even if it took a while, and for trying to work through my questions. I know it's not easy." His heart felt heavy with gratitude. "I should be thanking you," he murmured, hugging her gently, "for not shutting me out." And so they settled into a rare moment of closeness, aware that trust was something they had to rebuild and nurture. The shock of the heel and earring discovery still haunted them, but they had weathered the worst of it. Maybe there would be more hurdles ahead, there almost certainly would be. But in the quiet sanctuary of their living room, they both felt that their marriage was still standing. Different, yes. Tested, absolutely, but intact. Weeks later, after Beth's visit came and went without incident, life resumed a rhythm. Robert and Susan engaged in the usual chores, planned the occasional date night, and fell into bed each night with the calm sense that they were finding a new footing. The topic of cross-dressing no longer loomed as an immediate crisis, but it remained present, something they navigated with caution and care. One evening, while Susan was brushing her hair in front of the bathroom mirror, Robert approached. He had been reading upstairs, but a thought had prompted him. "Susan," he started, leaning against the doorframe, "I've been wondering if you might ever want to see me dress up again, in a more comfortable setting. I don't want to push, but I don't want us to avoid it forever either." She caught his eye in the reflection. After a moment, she set her brush down. "I've considered it," she admitted. "It's still a work in progress for me. But maybe we can try another night, like we did before. Only this time, I can help, if you want." He blinked, a mixture of appreciation and surprise washing over him. "Help?" She shrugged, turning to face him fully. "I'm not talking about a full makeover or anything. I'm just saying I could maybe give you a hand picking something out. I'd like to be part of it in a small way, rather than feeling it's this separate thing you do without me." A soft smile touched his lips. "That would mean a lot." He stepped closer, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "You have no idea how much I appreciate you trying." She nodded, her expression lingering on the edge of uncertainty, but also a quiet determination. "We're in this together. That's the promise of marriage, right?" Robert's throat felt tight. He nodded, lacking the words. He leaned in and kissed her softly on the forehead, feeling her tension ebb just slightly. And so, one more evening arrived where Susan, after finishing her lesson plans, wandered into the bedroom and found Robert standing near the closet, shyly eyeing a few items that had arrived in the mail. She joined him, arms folded, a nervous but resolute set to her features. Together, they chose a simple outfit, a loose-fitting long-sleeve top in a soft fabric and a knee-length skirt that wasn't too snug. Susan insisted it would be more comfortable than that form-fitting dress he'd been wearing. Robert nodded, grateful for her guidance. Susan waited in the living room while he changed. When he emerged, he found her flipping through a magazine. She glanced up, swallowing hard at the sight of him, but gave a small nod of acknowledgement. This time she didn't look away. Instead, she asked, "How does it feel?" He took a breath, wiggling his toes inside flat shoes. "It feels nice," he admitted softly. With cautious steps, he moved to sit beside her. She turned slightly to face him, eyes scanning the outfit. A silent moment passed before she reached toward the neckline of the top, adjusting it lightly, making it rest more naturally on his shoulders. The gesture was tender, free of mockery or disdain. He felt a rush of affection that made his eyes sting. Susan managed a half smile. "Better," she said, her voice wavering just a bit. "See? Not so tight across your shoulders." He nodded, breathing in the moment. "Thank you," he murmured. They spent the next half hour talking in hushed tones. She asked if he felt comfortable, physically and emotionally. He asked her how she was coping. She admitted it was still strange for her, but having a say in picking his clothes made it a bit easier to handle. Neither pretended everything was perfect, but both recognized they were forging a path. Eventually, Susan stood, lightly patting his knee. "I'm going to grab something to drink. Want anything?" "Water, please," he said. She left the room, and he exhaled, realizing that the atmosphere, though delicate, was no longer suffocating. When she returned with 2 glasses of water, she handed him one and sank onto the couch. Their gazes met, and he recognized a gentler acceptance in her expression. She set her glass aside, and he saw her eyes flicker to his skirt, then back to his face. His cheeks warmed slightly, but he felt a little more at ease. "Robert," she began, "I want you to remember I love you. That part hasn't changed." He swallowed, tears threatening to surface. "I love you too," he whispered. She scooted closer, closing the gap between them on the couch. Her hand found his. Their wedding bands, glinting under the living room lamp, reminded them both of the vows they had exchanged years before. Vows that were now tested in unexpected ways, but still holding strong. In that small pocket of time, they felt the steady pulse of their bond, changed, but intact. Neither had all the answers about what this would look like long term. Would Robert eventually want to expand his wardrobe even more? Was Susan ready to share this reality with anyone else? Those questions hovered at the edges of their thoughts, but for now, they simply held hands, letting their closeness speak for them. There would undoubtedly be days of doubt, possibly arguments, and plenty of uncomfortable conversations. But the moment Susan found that heel in the car no longer stood as a catastrophic ending. Instead, it became a turning point that forced them to confront the truths they had avoided for too long. And in that confrontation, they discovered that openness, however difficult, was the foundation on which they might continue to build their marriage. So they sat there, side by side, the hush of the house embracing them. Outside, night had settled over the neighborhood. A delicate hush was broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning and the gentle sound of their breathing. The road ahead was uncharted territory, filled with pitfalls and possibilities. But for now, in this living room, they held each other's hands and decided, in silent agreement, to keep going forward, together.
Did you like the story? Hit that like button and tell me what you thought in the comments. Do you want to hear more stories? Subscribe and hit the bell. For exclusive content and early access, check out our Patreon. You can find the link in the description, or you can watch any of the videos shown on my right. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.